protectionism. And that is going to impact not only the citizenry, but impact businesses in many respects. And so I don't think it can be ignored. I am not quite as alarmist as some folks in terms of the end of democracy and civil war and some of the other things that some people are talking about. On the one hand, I do think this is an important election, and we need to be rightly talking about the issues.
Stefan, do you feel like you worked within the government, the Obama administration? Do we still have checks and balances?
Obviously, our system hasn't changed. What has changed, Carol, is we used to govern from the middle, and now we're governing from the extremes in both parties. And that is what creates a lot of, I think, these tensions and a lot of our ineffectiveness in terms of our ability to implement any policies. And I think, frankly, and this is my personal point of view, until we get back to the middle, we're going to have some real issues, because that's what creates the animosity and the ability to collaborate. And when President Biden was in the Senate, he was notoriously well known, and rightly so, for actually being able to collaborate across the aisle. And you don't see that from either party at the moment, and I don't see that changing with this election in either direction.
You did say until we get back to the middle. Really optimistic. Do you see within? I mean, it's not an.
I think he said he was an optimist.
Within our lifetime, do we get back to the middle?
I don't know, Ken. You may as well be hopeful, because it's better choice.
Yeah.
That's fair. Your clients, what do they ask you most about?
Well, I think at the moment, as you rightly said, there was a whole conversation around what was going to happen on the top of the Democratic ticket, then the implications of the assassination attempt, clearly. But I think there's still a lot of uncertainty in the economy. And you guys spend a lot of time understandably talking about the markets, but the markets and the real economy are divergent. And the fact is that despite being at all-time highs in the equity market, consumer sentiment is not high. Savings are being depleted. Inflation is going up. Costs to consumers are going up. Car payments, mortgage payments are higher because of interest rates. And that's creating a real sense of a lack of prosperity with most American households. And households, Carol, you know this, households don't own a lot of stock.
Right.
So all of that good stuff that we talk about in the equity markets really doesn't impact households traditionally. And even that high equity market, we guys talk about this all the time, it's really technology.
Right.
And it's not just technology, it's a handful of companies in the technology sector.
Why do you think that so much America is struggling at a time when the economy is so good for so many people?
Well, I don't know, Tim. Is it so good for so many people? There's a real wealth gap, and it's good for a lot of, I think, your listeners who occupy a certain economic position in this country, and I'm not so sure it's so good for so many people. A lot of people are struggling, and that is why this populism that President Trump and J.D. Vance espouse has become so popular. And I think, we can't ignore that. And, we can all have stylistic concerns and concerns about some of their policies, but the people, the Americans that they are talking to, really feel what they are trying to address.
Our thanks to Stefan Seelig, managing partner and founder of Bridge Park Advisors.
Still ahead on Bloomberg Business Week. Like Stefan Seelig, our next segment is with another individual who has worked in both the public and private sectors and truly understands the connection between financial markets, business, and government.
Carlisle's David Rubenstein on his exclusive with Fed Chair Jay Powell. That's up next. This is Bloomberg.
World markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg 1130. Now, a global news update. The director of the Secret Service will face Congress on Monday. Director Kimberly Cheadle will testify before lawmakers for the first time since the assassination attempt on former President Trump at his Pennsylvania rally. Cheadle has refused calls to resign. President Biden's camp says the president is staying in the 2024 race. Brian Shook has more.
VP Kamala Harris reportedly told major Democratic donors, "We are going to win the election." The Times says Harris spoke briefly about Biden, then pivoted to attacks on Donald Trump.
35 Democrats now publicly call for Biden to step aside. Florida man is facing charges after making threats to kill former President Trump and his VP pick, J.D. Vance. Jupiter police announced the arrest of Michael Wiseman yesterday. He's charged with written threats to kill after an investigation discovered he made the threats on social media. Police said they were alerted by online crime tips and by people that came to report it in person. I'm Rob March here.
And I'm Denise Pellegrini in the Bloomberg Newsroom. If you're flying today, it's looking a lot better than yesterday after that massive ground stop caused by massive computer problems triggered by private security company CrowdStrike yesterday. Today, airlines trying to get back to normal. Still some delays and cancellations, but nothing like the mass chaos we saw yesterday. FlightAware indicates some of the biggest problems we are seeing today, though, in terms of canceled flights are at LaGuardia. Things do look a little better out at JFK and even Newark. Businesses and governments picking up pieces across the globe, and Bo Woods, founder of Stratego Security, calls yesterday's computer problems very concerning.
When a single supply chain link can take out a whole system, like healthcare or others, we need to understand what those impacts are like, who is in the best position to be able to head those off, and then put the responsibility on them to take the necessary actions so that we can avoid these billions of dollars in outages and millions of hours of downtime sitting at the airport.
Bo Woods is founder of Stratego Security. President Biden has been reporting huddling this weekend with top political aides as he plots to return to the campaign trail in a last-ditch effort to salvage his re-election campaign. He's planning visits to Texas and Georgia soon, according to Axios. Despite wars raging overseas, the top White House official says there is no specific threat to the U.S. amid election year concerns. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
It's an election year, and what we all know very well and what has been discussed here at the forum this year and in years past is that our adversaries do look at American elections as points to try to influence, to try to undermine confidence in our democracy.
And Sullivan speaking at the Aspen Security Forum in Colorado. And the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau says apps that let workers access their paychecks before payday are effectively actually providing loans. Bloomberg's Amy Morris explains.
The CFPB says those services often come with a fee, so they're providing a loan and therefore subject to the Truth in Lending Act. If enacted, a rule proposed by the agency would provide clarity to a fast-growing industry known as the earned wage access that's been compared to payday loans. The agency wants borrowers to be able to easily compare products and prevent, quote, race-to-the-bottom business practices. Earned wage access apps have been around for more than a decade, but they gained popularity since the COVID pandemic. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thank you, Amy. And Global News 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Denise Pellegrini. This is Bloomberg.
Take your Bloomberg radio listening experience to the next level. Download the Bloomberg Business app today and listen on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Get live radio, podcasts, and hourly news updates no matter where you are, from coast to coast and across the globe. Plus, expanded details on your favorite shows at the click of a button. The Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto features. Download it free in the Apple App Store or on Google Play. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything.
Westwood One Sports presents this special report on the 152nd British Open Championship. Sponsored by the United States Postal Service. Simple, affordable, and reliable shipping with USPS Ground Advantage. Scoring average at Royal Troon over the first two rounds, almost 3.5 shots over par. 80 players made the cut at +6. Some of the movers on moving day include 2013 Masters champion Adam Scott, who is 4 under through 12 holes and +1 for the week. Also 4 under today is John Catlin, the Californian who plays primarily in Europe. He is back to level par. Once again, that leaderboard, Shane Lowry at -7, Daniel Brown, Justin Rose, both at 5 under par, Billy Horschel, Dean Burmester, and Scotty Scheffler all at -2. Corey Connors, Jason Day, and 2 others at -1. With this report on the British Open, I'm Whit Watson, Westwood One Sports.
Every business faces challenges, but complicated, expensive, and uncertain shipping shouldn't be one of them. With USPS Ground Advantage from the United States Postal Service, you can avoid all the noise. No more unexpected surcharges, hidden fees, or complex rate structures. It's just easy, cost-effective, and dependable shipping. Tune your business's frequency to success and turn shipping to your advantage. Learn how at USPS.com/advantage. USPS Ground Advantage. Simple, affordable, reliable.
At Vanguard, you're more than just an investor, you're an owner.
So whether you're planning for retirement or trying to save up for your next big adventure, Vanguard will help work alongside you to set personalized investment goals. That's the value of ownership. All investing is subject to risk. Vanguard is owned by its funds, which are owned by Vanguard's fund shareholder clients. Vanguard Marketing Corporation, distributor.
This is the story of the one. As a maintenance engineer, he hears things differently. To the untrained ear, everything on his shop floor might sound fine, but he can hear gears grinding or a belt slipping. So he steps in to fix the problem at hand before it gets out of hand. And he knows Granger's got the right product he needs to get the job done, which is music to his ears. Call, click Granger.com, or just stop by. Granger, for the ones who get it done.
Now, your 3-day weather forecast on Bloomberg 1130.
We're looking at a partly to mostly cloudy day today, high 85 to 90 degrees. Tonight, partly cloudy, chance for showers, low 70 to 75. Tomorrow, mostly sunny, high 85 to 90. Tomorrow night, partly to mostly cloudy, low 70 to 75. Monday, more sun than clouds, high 85 to 90. Tuesday, partly to mostly sunny, chance for storms, so 85 to 90. That's the 3-day weather forecast on Bloomberg 1130.
Bloomberg Radio brings you influential voices on the stories that matter. Fed Chair Jerome Powell.
The U.S. economy has performed really remarkably well over the last couple of years.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen.
We do not wish to disengage from China economically.
Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan.
It would be good for America if we ended up with a more normal rate structure and a growing economy.
The names that matter on the news you need. Listen on Bloomberg 1130 or anytime on the Bloomberg Talks podcast.
This is the Bloomberg Money Minute. Lacrosse is trying to build a national audience with professional players.
It's a sport that has been growing faster than any other major team sport in North America over the last 15 years.
Paul Rabel, speaking to the Bloomberg Big Take podcast, co-founded the Premier Lacrosse League in 2018 with his brother Mike. They've attracted TV deals and wealthy investors, and they are building an audience. But they think the key to their growth is paying the players more. The PLL has raised player pay from $8,000 in their first year to as much as $80,000 this season. But many players, like Ryan Conrad, treat lacrosse like a second full-time job.
You can essentially do your entire job while you're on the road.
Conrad's employer, the private equity firm KKR, has been supportive, but PLL co-founder Rabel wants the money to be good enough so players don't have to moonlight. Tracy Jonke, Bloomberg Radio.
Now a sports update on Bloomberg 1130.
Juan Soto, 4 for 4, scored 3 times more than Garrett Cole needed as the Yankees beat the Rays 6-1, 8 punch-outs in 6 innings as Cole, the winner of the game. Marlins' Jake Burger took the Mets deep, doubled as well, a 6-4 win for Miami down south. And the Nets, they had former lottery pick, the stud out of Stanford, Zaire Williams from the Memphis Grizzlies. With your Bloomberg Sports Update, I'm Rob Bushka.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
On inflation, in the first quarter, we didn't make any more progress. The second quarter, actually, we did make some more progress. We've had now 3 better readings, and if you average them, that's a pretty good pace.
That's Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell talking with David Rubenstein this past Monday at an Economic Club of Washington Lenten event. It was just about a week and a half ago that Chair Powell was up on Capitol Hill for 2 days of congressional testimony that was followed by cooling inflation data. It all comes ahead of another FOMC meeting at the end of this month.
In David's conversation, Fed Chair Powell declined to give any guidance on the timing of interest rate moves. That kind of makes sense, right, Carol? That's not surprising.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
He did, though, say that the most recent CPI data, quote, do add somewhat, end quote, to confidence that inflation is heading down to the central bank's 2% goal, and that labor markets are now in a, quote, better place.
Right, we got another kind of confirmation of that as jobless claims were ticking up. So, again, some softening in the labor market. Not coming undone, but nonetheless some softening. Well, the conversation, though, on Monday also touched on the assassination attempt on Donald Trump and whether Jay Powell would serve another term as Federal Reserve Chairman if Donald Trump is back in the White House. All of this, we do want to point out, happening before the Bloomberg headlines and Bloomberg Business Week cover story on Donald Trump saying he wouldn't seek to remove Powell before his term ends in 2026.
That was just a conversation with David Rubenstein, who is a co-founder of the private equity firm Carlyle, also a Bloomberg host. For more on his talk with Fed Chair Jay Powell.
I am the chairman of the Economic Club of Washington, and in that capacity, I often interview government leaders and business leaders, and Jay Powell had been somebody I'd interviewed before. He had worked at my firm a number of years ago, well before he was at the Fed, and so we worked out a date that I would do this interview.
David, we were chuckling the whole time. I mean, this was like a Powell that you don't see at press conferences, a Powell that you don't see every day. It's clear that you two are familiar with one another. What did you want to get out of the interview? Because we know that he's not going to give us any indication about rate path. He established that at the top of the interview. What did you want to get out of it?
Well, I think it's always good to humanize well-known people, and people can understand them better and the way they make decisions and the way they kind of handle their job. And I thought humanizing him would be always good. Clearly, when you're chairman of the Fed, you talk in what I've often called Fed speak, which is to say it's very difficult for the average person to understand it. But Jay does a better job than some of his predecessors in speaking in common English because he's not a trained economist. And I just thought giving people an update on his perspectives on the economy would be a good thing. I mean, obviously, as you point out, he's not going to announce at an interview with me that he's lowering interest rates. You can't expect that. But I think he gave a pretty good description of how they decide to lower interest rates or increase interest rates. And I thought it was informative. And therefore, I thought, he accomplished his goal, which is to kind of, show people how he makes decisions. And I accomplished my goal, which is kind of humanize the chairman of the Fed a little bit more than maybe he otherwise would be.
Well, David, help us understand your relationship. You mentioned that you guys do go back years, of course. He was a partner at the Carlyle Group before he went into public service. I'm wondering if you're in touch with him regularly now, if you consider him a friend. Just give us an idea of your relationship with him.
I wouldn't say I'm in touch with him regularly. When you're chairman of the Fed, I think it's somebody like me doesn't want to be calling him up all the time. And, I don't want to look like I'm trying to get information from him. And he worked at Carlyle for years, so I wouldn't say I was his closest friend or vice versa. So I know him reasonably well. I've interviewed him, I think, 3 times or 4 times at the Economic Club of Washington, and I have a good relationship with him, but I wouldn't say we're, close as friends, but I certainly like him and admire what he's done for the country and the job that he's had.
What's interesting too, and something we've talked a lot about, David, is, the neutral rate and what he thinks about that 2% goal that the Federal Reserve has. Right. He said the neutral rate is probably higher today. Monetary policy is restrictive, but not severely restrictive. I am curious how you see things. Do you think the neutral rate doesn't make sense anymore, that it does need to be higher? And what is your expectation or what you think the Fed should be doing when it comes to interest rates right now?
Well, I think the country will do much better off listening to Jay Powell's views on where the interest rates should go than probably my views on interest rates. But I think it's a general sense that the market is believing that there will be a cut. I think Jay made it clear that he doesn't listen to the political situation. So I have said in speeches that I thought it would be unlikely that the Fed would want to cut during a presidential election period of time. But I think he's made it clear that that's not his view or the view of the FOMC, that if they think the data warrants a cut, they will have a cut. And therefore, the Fed could do something at the end of July when they meet, or they could do something again when they meet in September. And my guess is that sometime before the Fed meets after the election, they will do something. That'd be my current thinking. The economy could change, and obviously data is everything. But right now, the markets are anticipating, and I think the Fed is not shutting down the idea that something could happen before the election.
Before the election, okay. Do you think that the election in any way sways? I mean, we're all human, right? And we can say we're very objective, but we're human and impacted by lots of things that are going on in this world. Do you think that Jay Powell and policymakers at the Fed might be swayed a little bit, a small influence when it comes to the November election, presidential election?
Everything Jay says is that they don't really pay attention to the election dates. And I think right now, since so many people pay attention to the markets and the interest rates where they are, I think that the Fed will do what the data suggests is appropriate. And when the data gets to the point where they see inflation more or less getting to 2% and the economy softening a bit, I suspect they will not wait until after the election because they don't want to be seen as political. And therefore, while they might be criticized by some for lowering interest rates before the end of before the election's over, I just think the Fed has given enough signals that they're not going to worry about the election. They'll do what the data suggests is appropriate.
I do wonder, David, as you said, you've talked with Jay Powell several times, certainly in this format. So, monetary policy, obviously, and the economy first and foremost. And there are certain things that Jay Powell will go. You guys laugh about some of the things he will obviously not reveal. But having said that, at the end of the conversation, when it comes to the things the Bloomberg audience cares so much about in terms of monetary policy and the economy, what was your key takeaway from Jay Powell?
My key takeaway from the interview and with my discussion with him is that he's a man who's very much on top of the data. He enjoys the job, not worn out by it. Doesn't say, woe is to me, I have got all this pressure on my shoulder. I think he can deal with it quite well. He's used to it. He's been in the chair for quite some time. I think he's reasonably happy now with where the economy is. Remember, we didn't go into the hard landing that everybody was predicting. People thought there would be a recession last year or this year. That didn't happen. So whoever gets credit for it, the Fed deserves some share of that credit because they managed the economy into a really nice soft landing so far. And so right now, while unemployment is going up, I don't think it's going up by such a level that's scaring people. I think the markets are in pretty good shape and the economy is in pretty good shape.
He didn't want to comment on the market, the idea of the so-called Trump trade returning after this horrific event. But I'm curious about your view and what you think is being priced into markets right now. David, the Fed chair not weighing in, but politically, what is being priced in right now?
Clearly, the events no doubt scared a lot of people about the violence that is still prevalent in this country in many areas, unfortunately. And so, fortunately, we did not have an assassination, though one person did die. It's a sad situation. Obviously, the investigations will figure out what the Secret Service could have done differently or better. I'm not an expert in that area, so I just can't say what they will find. But clearly, we haven't eliminated violence from our political situation, unfortunately.
David, you served in the federal government. You were chief counsel to the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee subcommittee back in the 70s, deputy assistant to the president for domestic policy during the Carter administration. The democracy has faced other heavy periods before. It feels rather heavy today. Is there something different this time around? You are, I feel like it's safe to say, a student of history. You respect past leaders and what they've done. How do you make sense of this particular political and historical period?
Well, it's difficult to really put it in context right now because you can't really tell what the historical impact is until many years afterwards. But right now, the country seems to be fairly bitterly divided between the Democrats and Republicans. And it wasn't 50 years ago or so when John Kennedy ran for president against Richard Nixon in 1960. They campaigned in most of the states because they didn't know how the states would go. Now the country's fairly divided, so we know how almost all the states are going to go. There are only 5 or 6, maybe 7 states where it's a kind of a swing state. So it's much different than it used to be. The tensions between both sides seem to be much greater than they used to be. Bipartisanship is something that is not as common as it used to be in Washington, D.C. So I don't know whether the events of this weekend will scare people into saying we should try to be less I'd say violent in our rhetoric and less condemning of other sides. But clearly President Trump has suggested that he would make a more unifying speech than he otherwise was going to make. And I think President Biden's speech was designed to also have a unifying impact. Whether we can unify our country in a way like this, that I think we should, I don't know. But it will probably have some beneficial impact, though obviously the events were tragic.
David, are you optimistic, given the heated political environment right now?
I'm optimistic that the country is in reasonable shape economically. Politically, we can do more than we than we have been doing to kind of bring the country together. And that part, the jury is still out. But I'm hopeful that while the events were tragic over the weekend, that they'll have some beneficial impact in getting both sides, Democrats and Republicans, to try to work together more cooperatively.
Jay Powell said to you, predictions are very difficult, especially about the future. When you think about the future for the United States, politically, economically, what's top of mind? And curious if you have any plans to maybe want to be at the Federal Reserve. You guys talked about if it's a good job.
I think it's really hard to kind of say that all of a sudden we're going to eliminate all the schisms that we've had in the last couple of years. Clearly, there are a lot of tensions between the two sides, political sides. Jay Powell has been appointed by a Republican president and reappointed by a Democratic president, and he's done a really good job of kind of walking a fine line of not trying to be seen as political or Democratic or Republican. I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. Well, I think he's done a good job. Remember, this is not a job that anybody really thinks is an easy job. Many people who have emerged from the job
are generally applauded after they've served, but when they're serving, very often they get criticized by both sides, and it's hard to be chairman of the Fed. And in fact, as one chairman of the Fed once said, William McChesney Martin, my job is to take away the punch bowl at the party, which is to say, take away all the fun that you would want to get. And so that's the job of the chairman of the Fed, is to take away the punch bowl, and people don't like that.
Our thanks to David Rubenstein. He's a Bloomberg host and, of course, the Carlyle co-founder, also co-chair of Carlyle. You can watch David's interview with Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell on the David Rubenstein Show, Peer-to-Peer Conversations, airing July 24th at 9 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Television.
And that wraps up our first hour of the weekend edition of Bloomberg Business Week from Bloomberg Radio. Ahead in our next hour, a deep dive into space, including the new HBO documentary that chronicles the race for modern-day celestial land grabs. We speak with the Oscar-winning director as well as the producer of HBO's Wild Wild Space. That producer, by the way, Bloomberg's own Ashley Vance, whose book, When the Heavens Went on Sale, The Misfits and Geniuses Racing to Put Space Within Reach, is the launching pad for that film.
And speaking of space, a retired NASA astronaut on what it's like to share space in outer space and life lessons learned.
And listen up, all you Porsche files, not to worry. Electrification does not spell the end of the 911. We promise, we really do, and we'll also explain. This is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Masser.
And I'm Tim Stadevec. Stay with us. Today's top stories and global business headlines are coming up right now.
From the financial capital of the world, broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is WBBR New York, Bloomberg 1130. Now, a global news update. 12 more Democrats are calling for President Joe Biden to drop out of the race. The Washington Post reports Senators Sherrod Brown of Ohio and Martin Heinrich of New Mexico joined 10 House members on Friday who believe Biden is losing the election to Republican Donald Trump. In a statement, Senator Brown said, quote, "I think the president should end his campaign." Heinrich said Biden should step aside for the good of the country. The head of the Biden campaign says, however, he's staying in the race and not going anywhere. The Democratic National Committee is placing several billboards in the Grand Rapids area starting today, opposing the Trump-Vance campaign stances on several topics. The billboards, which will display in both English and Spanish, highlight Project 2025, a think tank report that has ties to former Trump administration officials. The Trump-Vance rally is set to kick off today in the afternoon, exactly 1 week after an attempt on Trump's life during an outdoor rally in Pennsylvania. There are a total of 7 billboards. According to a Real Clear Politics average, Trump leads Biden by 4.3 points in top battleground states. A second Donald Trump presidency would likely have consequences for China. Aaron Real reports.
If Donald Trump wins the U.S. presidential election, he has said he plans for 60% tariffs on Chinese goods. Many economists believe that if 60% tariffs are imposed, that would have a profound implication for the global macroeconomy. China's economy grew by 4.7% in the second quarter compared to a year ago.
The spooky season has started early for Home Depot, which is already rolling out their online ads for Halloween decorations. Experts say it's a low-risk move that will pay huge dividends.
Decorating people's homes for Halloween is increasing, and so they're pulling demand forward in order to be able to get the best decorations for their house.
Thomas McMillan heads the Center for Retailing Studies at Texas A&M. He predicts other big-box stores will follow Home Depot's lead. I'm Rob Artier. Researchers at Oregon Health and Science University are working on a one-time flu vaccine. It would provide protection against the flu for life. It uses a vaccine platform previously developed at OHSU to fight HIV and tuberculosis. Influenza pathogens are inserted into the common herpes virus, which infects
Entrance will start now. Proceed about 2 miles to 4th Street. In 1/10 of a mile, your destination is ahead. Your destination is ahead. You have arrived at your destination. The route guidance is now finished. The route guidance will start now. Proceed about 4/10 of a mile to Walnut Road. In a quarter of a mile, right turn onto Walnut Road. Next right, and then left turn. Next left. In 2/10 of a mile, left turn onto Landing Road. Next left. Proceed about 4/10 of a mile to George Street. In a quarter of a mile, right turn onto George Street.